Hello, and welcome to People of the Pod, brought to you by American Jewish Committee. Each week, we take you beyond the headlines to help you understand what they all mean for America, Israel, and the Jewish people. I'm your host, Manya Brachear Pashman. Bianna Golodryga is an Emmy Award-winning news anchor for CNN who has reported extensively on the October 7th Hamas terror attack on Israel and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. She is a mother, and she is now a published novelist. Co-written with leading Israeli news anchor Yonit Levy, Don't Feed the Lion is about how the rise of antisemitism affects Theo, his sister Annie, and their friends Gabe and Connor, all students in a Chicago middle school. And it was written with middle schoolers in mind. Bianna is with us now to discuss the book, which comes out in paperback later this month, along with my co-anchor this week, my son Max, a middle schooler who read the book as well and has a few questions of his own. I will let Max do the honors.
Bianna, welcome to People of the Pod.
Well, it is a joy to be with you, Manya, and especially you, Max. We wrote the book for you and your peers especially. So really excited to hear your thoughts on the book.
Well, I want to know, Bianna, what prompted you to write this book? Was it the mother in you or the journalist or a little bit of both?
It was definitely a little bit of both. It was the mother in me initially where the idea was first launched and the seed planted even before October 7th. Sadly, anti-Semitism has been with us for millennia. But I never thought that I would be having these conversations with my own kids in the city with the largest Jewish community and population outside of Israel. But you'll recall that there were a few high-profile anti-Semitic social media posts and controversies surrounding Kanye West and then Kyrie Irving, who's a famous NBA player at the time. And my son, who was 10 at the time, a huge sports fan, and was very upset about the fact that not only were these comments made and these posts made, but there was really no accountability for them. There was no consequence. Ultimately, Kyrie Irving was suspended for a few games, but there was just a deluge of news surrounding this, people apologizing for him, but not him apologizing for himself. So my son asked, as we were on our way to a basketball game to watch Kyrie play, asked, why do they hate us? Can I not even go to the game? Does he not want me there? And I really was dumbfounded. I didn't know how to respond. And I said, I don't have the answer for that, but, I'm going to reach out to your school because I'm sure this is something that they're addressing and dealing with and have the resources for. This was after the murder of George Floyd. And so we had already witnessed all of the investments, thankfully, into resources for our kids and conversations, both at schools and the workforce about racism, how to deal with racism, how to spot and identify it, other forms of hate. And I just assumed that that would include anti-Semitism. But when I reached out to the school and asked, what are they doing on anti-Semitism? The response stunned me. It's basically nothing. And so, as I said, the seed was planted that we really need to do something about this. There's a real void here. And then, of course, when the attacks of October 7th happened, Yonit and I, were on the phone and messaging every single day right after. And it was pretty quick, maybe 2 weeks later when, we'd already started seeing an uptick in anti-Semitism around the world and here in the U.S. and New York as well, where we said, we have to do something. And I said, I think we should write this book. We should write the book we couldn't find, that I couldn't find at the time, because I did a bit of research and there were really no books like this for this particular age group.
It was kind of answered in your other answer to the first question, but when I first read the book, I started wondering whether the incidents described in the book, were they taken from your experiences or was it a realistic fiction book?
I would say the inspiration for the athlete came from real life events. I am a big sports fan as well, and I grew up watching basketball, and I have a lot of admiration for so many of these players, and I actually believe in redemption. And so people say things and they make mistakes, and I don't believe in purity tests. If people say things that are wrong, I think they have a right to apologize for it, make up for it. I don't like canceling people. We learn from our own mistakes. We grow from our mistakes. No one's perfect. I think it's just more about accountability for all of us. And so the idea came about, yes, from real life, but This is a soccer player in our book. I don't feel that he's very remorseful, even though ultimately he does have a quasi apology. But, it's the impact that it has on society and fans and those who support him, especially like your age and my son's age. I think those are really the ones who hurt the most.
Yeah, the impressionable minds. I mean, I thought the book did a lovely job of illustrating just how impressionable these young minds were, and then also how viral this was. I mean, once the celebrity athlete said his comments, what it unleashed. And, you don't get into any violence. There's one incident that is rough, but brief. But it's, the swastika painted on the locker, a rock through a window. But it's just that viral spread. I mean, was that your intent, to kind of illustrate this slow contagion?
Yes, I think our kids are subject to so much more information than we were as kids and teenagers their age as well. Every society has had to deal with their challenges, and every generation has as well. And as we've said, anti-Semitism has been with us for millennia. But when you compound that with social media and the dangers, there's so many great things about social media. We have access to so much information, but then when you throw in disinformation, misinformation, things going viral, news spreading, how much time people spend on social media sites, and the influence that they succumb to by sometimes bad actors. So the book is not for anti-Semites, but I think what the book relays is what we've noticed, and sort of our theory is that anti-Semitism has been somewhat accepted as part of society for far too long, and it's never been elevated to the level of urgency that other forms of hate has been. So I mentioned racism and post-George Floyd. I would think that if that much attention had been put into anti-Semitism as well, that people, especially children and those at school, would understand the gravity of anti-Semitism and, how much danger can be created from people who espouse anti-Semitic views and, draw swastikas because they think it's funny, or they don't think it's such a big deal because they don't spend time talking about it, and they don't understand so much hate and so much pain that's behind these symbols, that's behind these words. And, we are such a small minority that so many times it's Jews that feel like they have to carry the weight and the burden of other people's actions, even if they don't mean to be as hurtful and as vile as some of this language is. So you said impressionable. That is why we are targeting this age group specifically, because it's such a magical age group. Kids Max's age and my son's age, anywhere between 9 and 15, they're very impressionable, but they still communicate with their families, their parents. They talk at dinner tables. They may not have social media accounts, but they are very well aware of what's going on in the world and are very curious and have access to so much, good and bad. And so by not having this conversation at that age, we're doing them a disservice. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice as adults by not addressing these problems and this particular issue of anti-Semitism head on.
I'm curious, once you identified that void in the school's curriculum and strategies for addressing prejudice, did they do anything to address that and to repair that void? I know a lot of Jewish parents are finding that really the burden falls on them to address these things in a very reactive manner, right? Not proactive. And I'm just curious what the situation ended up being at your school.
I think we're starting, without focusing as much on my school, because I feel that it's pretty obvious that that was status quo for many schools, not just in New York, but across the country, that you would have books and resources and materials on Hanukkah and Jewish holidays for kindergartners, and then some of the older kids in high school are introduced to the Holocaust, right? And some of these more challenging topics in areas in Jewish history to cover. And then the story sort of ends there. I don't know if it's because people are worried about conflating the Middle East and the conflict there with anti-Semitism, but there's a huge void. And it's something, again, if you're 2% of the population and you are the victim of 70%, according to the FBI, of all religious-based, violence, then there's a big problem. And the fact that that's not identified or discussed in schools to us was just not acceptable. And so I think it's sort of a cop out to say, no, it's because of the war, or it's because of this. Anti-Semitism morphs and comes in different waves. And fortunately, I didn't experience much of it growing up. But that doesn't mean that, it's not going to rear its ugly head again. And it has. And that was before the attacks of October 7th. We obviously had the Tree of Life shooting, right? We had so many incidents around the world in the first Intifada, the second Intifada, dating before that. I don't remember growing up without security outside of my synagogue or, any Jewish institution. This is the best country in the world, but we've sort of come to accept that. And now, we're at a place where I don't necessarily feel comfortable walking into a Jewish house of worship or institution without security. So we really, I think, wanted to send a message that these are conversations we should have been having for a long time now. And the best way to start it is with our kids, because like Max, they have so many questions and they also have so much empathy.
You mentioned your son being your main inspiration for it. Has he read the book?
Oh, yes. I was the most nervous about, and Yonit has 3 kids too, so we were the most nervous about appealing to them. It wasn't our editor or anybody else, our spouses, or even people in the industry that we cared about more than our kids, because we knew their reaction would really set the tone for, kids like yourselves. And you're not a monolith. I know some kids like a certain book and some kids don't, but we wanted to make sure to write this book so it didn't feel like homework. So it didn't feel like you were forced to read it at school. And we wanted you to be able to identify with the characters and the story and find it really interesting. And oh, by the way, it just so happens to deal with a subject that we haven't really touched upon yet. So yes, my son really liked it. Both my kids really liked it.
Would you agree, Max, that it didn't feel like homework?
Yeah, it felt like, a good book feels like kind of like watching a movie, because it gives you enough details to the point where you can visualize the characters and kind of see what's going on. And that's also one of the reasons I like books more than movies, because it allows you to use your imagination to build the characters a little bit. But a good book doesn't just leave you with a general outline of what you want. It will give you the full picture, and then you can build most of the picture. Then you can build off that with your mind. And I felt that it really did not feel like something that we were forced to read, because that's a lot less interesting.
Well, that is the best review one could get, honestly, Max. And I can tell you like a good book and you're a voracious reader. And I agree with you. 99.9% of the time, the book will always be better than the movie because of that detail, because of using your imagination. And so we wanted this to be a story that appealed to boys, girls, parents, kids. It was very hard for us to say, oh, here's our target audience, because we really wanted it to be an experience for every generation and for every position in life, from, again, a kid, a parent, a teacher, a principal, a coach, grandparents.
It's interesting. You mentioned generations, and you mentioned being a Soviet refugee. And clearly you're outspoken about anti-Semitism. You're raising your children to be outspoken about anti-Semitism. What about your parents? How did they address anti-Semitism, or the form of anti-Semitism that they experienced?
Yeah, as I said, I was so fortunate. I was like a piece of luggage. It was my parents who were courageous enough to decide to move to this country as Jewish refugees from the Soviet Union, where anti-Semitism was, institutionalized. It was from top down. That was a mandated policy. And so my parents knew they didn't have a future. I didn't have a future in the Soviet Union. And so, of course, their dream was to come to the United States. And it was still the best decision they've ever made and the best, place I could have been raised. As I said, I was very fortunate not to really experience anti-Semitism as a kid. And mind you, I was the only Jewish student for many years at my first school, and we were the only Jewish family in our neighborhood for many years. Ultimately, my parents moved more into the center of the town, and we always went to synagogue, so we were always around Jewish people and families, but the majority of my, especially early childhood friends, were not Jewish. And I have to say, for me, learning about anti-Semitism, it was more of a history lesson as to like why we left a certain country and why you can come to America and you're not identified as a Jew by your race or religion. You're an American. I'm an American Jew. And, that's just not how people were identified in the Soviet Union. That was their race. I mean, that my birth certificate said Jew. My parents' library card said Jew. There were quotas in getting into good schools, right? And the types of jobs they could get. So for me, it was sort of backward looking, even knowing that, yes, anti-Semitism still exists, but it's sort of controlled. Once in a while, we would have a bomb threat at our synagogue. And again, there were always police officers out there. And I noticed that was a difference from my friends' churches, because what ended up being sort of a beautiful tradition that my parents didn't intend to do, it just so happened to be the case that when I would have friends spend the night at my house or I would spend the night at their house, sometimes they would come to Shabbat services with us and I would go to church with them. And so for many of their congregants, I was the first Jewish person they'd ever seen. I was welcomed with open arms, but for, coming to my services, it was the first time they'd been to a Jewish house of worship. And it was very, very meaningful. I think a great learning opportunity. But yeah, for me growing up, it wasn't a top priority. It wasn't top of mind just because I knew that I was an American Jew and that was who I was here. And it was only, the last few years where I realized, this is not something to be taken for granted.
I can definitely relate to being the only Jewish person in my class because all through elementary school, there were no other Jewish kids in my grade. But as soon as I entered middle school, I met a few other kids who were Jewish and have actually become very good friends with. And it's just a lot more diversity.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I remember when I was in elementary school and we were trying to express this point too in the book, especially with Theo, that, so many kids at that age just want to be like everyone else. They don't want to stand out. And if you're the only Jewish kid, on your soccer team and all of a sudden you have practice or games right before Shabbat dinner, you're feeling the pressure and you don't want to be excluded from your friends' activities after or have to keep reminding your coach. And it's, incumbent on your coach and the adults in your life who are not Jewish to honor that, to respect that, to say, hey, we're going to move practice a little early, or hey, Theo, Max, I know you have Shabbat dinner, so we're going to work on these, exercises 30 minutes before the just to acknowledge that you are valued and you are respected. And that doesn't mean that everyone else's schedule needs to change because of yours, but it definitely doesn't mean that you have to walk on eggshells or feel like you're left out or stand out or different for all the wrong reasons because you have other responsibilities and plans. So for me, I remember as a kid, I was the only Jewish student in my elementary school for the first elementary school I went to. And I remember leaving for winter break and, our principal getting on the intercom, the loudspeaker, and wishing everyone, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy Hanukkah, Bianna. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to be excluded and it wasn't out of malevolence. Like it was just, so I want to include. But at that point, I already had a funny last name. My parents had accents. I was from the Soviet Union, which was the enemy at the time. So I definitely stood out for a number of reasons. And on top of that, I celebrate a different holiday. So yes, we learn and grow from it, but we can remember, I still remember it.
The title of the book is Don't Feed the Lion, and the book does get into that adage and what it means. Don't take the bait, right? Don't engage. That's how I interpreted it. But some would argue that it was not feeding the lion for a large portion of the book, staying silent, that really exacerbated the problem. Or are you referring more to the unproductive social media banter?
Well, I think it's, our message was that it shouldn't fall on the kids to do what's right. And that kids know what's right and innately, in their gut, like I said, that there's empathy in most kids. When you've hurt someone else's feelings, when something makes you feel sad. But what we do, especially as children, as we're still learning, is we take cues from the adults in our lives. So if the adults aren't responding to what that initial reaction you have, that gut instinct is, then you start to question, well, maybe it wasn't a big deal, or, maybe the swastika isn't, we'll just cover it up, or, why should we all suffer and have our team not play in the finals, just because of this one thing? And, oh, he didn't take it so personally, it's fine. And the principal then putting the pressure on Theo, right? Okay, I'm happy to write this report, but you know what it's going to generate. And so ultimately, you have the coach and you have others who come around to, okay, no, we've got to step up and do the right thing. But our biggest concern was for too long, and we know of this in real life instances from our own friends and family members, that the burden falls on the kids, on the students, who then have to deal with the ramifications, whether it's the victim of anti-Semitic, attacks or slurs, or those that are delivering them, because maybe they don't think it's that big of a deal because they haven't had conversations like this. They don't know how much that hurts somebody's feeling. They don't know the backstory or the history behind what that symbol means. So it was more on, yes, don't feed into your insecurity, don't feed into the hate, address it head on. But it's a two-way street. As much as Theo should have, and he realizes that he can learn from others around him, like his sister and Gabe, to do what's right and say what's right. It really is the adults that should have been the ones in the first place doing that.
Because in the book, you see Principal Connolly kind of pushing Theo to just say, oh, it's not a big deal, and to cover it up because of a sports team. And he wants the sports team to do well.
Yes, and all the work that this is going to involve now. And, all of a sudden, it's almost like it's Theo's fault that he was victimized.
And he's kind of pushing, he's saying, it's your choice, Theo, and then kind of starting to make the decision for him.
Right. So it really wasn't even Theo's choice. It's like he was playing mind games with Theo. And it took a lot of courage for Theo to even call for that meeting, right? So I'm so glad you picked up on that, Max. But again, instances similar to that, happen in real life that I know of, people close to me. So we just want to, again, through fiction, through a really good story, make clear to people that this is not okay.
So are you hoping that schools will pick up this book and use it as a resource, as a tool?
For sure. I mean, that is our ultimate goal. I think it should be in every single school, library. I see absolutely no reason why this would ever be deemed a controversial book or something. We've had conversations with a number of Jewish organizations about maybe perhaps providing some supplementals for the book that can be added for class conversations around the book from teachers and others. But Yonit and I went and we spoke at a couple of schools, and speaking to kids, it was just so eye-opening to know that there is a need for this, that they are so eager to have these conversations, that it's as much for Jewish students as it is for non-Jewish students, if not even more so. Jewish students feel that they can be finally heard, but non-Jewish students and allies can truly understand what it feels like and can have conversations about what to do to avoid certain situations, preemptively, avoid, or if they've seen certain situations or know about how to respond.
And I do appreciate the statement that the book makes about allies. Those are strong characters in the book.
We can't do it alone. Yeah, and we didn't want a throwaway character. We didn't want just an ally, Everyone has their own stories, and no one really knows what's truly going on in someone's home life and in their head and their heart and in their reality. So anytime, any day, our favorite characters would change. Don't ask Yonit and me who our favorite characters are. We love them all.
And add middle school hormones to the mix.
Exactly. And crushes and bar mitzvah prep and a lot of stress.
A lot of stress. Well, he just heaved a heavy sigh because you reminded him of his own bar mitzvah preparation.
Well, you will see that it's a magical experience, Max. Worth all the work.
Definitely. Well, Bianna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I love this conversation. I'm so glad that you liked the book, Max.
Thank you.
So, Max, you and I haven't really had a conversation since we both finished this book. We kind of went into the conversation with Bianna cold. I do want to know which character you identified with the most.
I really related to Theo with his stress over his bar mitzvah and the stress of having a little sister, which I know very, very well.
And why Theo, besides having the annoying sister, why did you relate to him?
Because I guess the stress of having a bar mitzvah in middle school and kind of being the only Jewish kid in your class.
Well, you have a few friends.
Well, a few, but not a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you realize before you read this book that the swastika, that spidery-looking symbol, was as evil as it is?
No. Well, yes, going into this book, I did know, but actually I figured it out in other books. Allow me to digress. I read Linked by Gordon Corman about this boy who finds a swastika in his school and then figures out that he is Jewish. And then swastikas start showing up around town. He comes up with a plan with his friends to stop it. And it changes points of view, kind of like Don't Feed the Lion.
Okay.
A very similar book, but what really helped me realize the meaning and terror of the swastika was Prisoner B3087 by Alan Gratz, about this 10-year-old boy who is alive right before the Holocaust, and he is taken to 10 different prison camps throughout the course of the Holocaust before his camp is liberated by American soldiers.
Was that a signed reading, or how did you come across that book?
I was actually sitting in the library just waiting for you to get to the library because after school.
All right. Was there anything in particular that drew you to that book?
I was just looking on the shelves because that was a summer reading book. So I was just like, okay, I guess I'll read it because we're supposed to read some, and I read like most of them. And it was just there on the shelf, and I decided this looks really interesting. And I picked it up and I read it, and it really had a deeper meaning than I expected it to.
Excellent. Excellent. You recommended Linked to me. I have not finished reading it yet, the Gordon Corman book. Would you recommend it to anyone else in your class, or would you recommend Don't Feed the Lion?
I would definitely recommend it. They're both great books. They're actually very similar. I'm not sure they would read it, though.
Why not?
Just not a lot of kids in my class are big readers.
Do you fear that they wouldn't be interested in the subject?
I mean, I don't really know. Because I don't know what goes on in their heads, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, put thoughts in their head, or decide what they would like for them. So I don't know.
That's fair. Okay. Well, good to talk with you.
It was great talking with you.
It was fun co-hosting. Happy 2026. We wish all of you a peaceful year ahead with time to pause and reflect. On behalf of the AJC podcast team, we thank you for listening over the past 8 years, and we thank everyone who has joined us as a guest during that time as well. What a privilege to share your voices and your stories. People of the Pod will be taking our own peaceful pause in 2026 to contemplate how we can best serve our audience. In the meantime, please continue to listen and share our limited series, The Forgotten Exodus and Architects of Peace. And we'd love to hear from you at podcasts@ajc.org. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by AJC. Our producer is Atara Lakritz. Our sound engineer is TK Broderick. You can subscribe to People of the Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or learn more at ajc.org/peopleofthepod.